the moment he said he was leaving, there wasn't a fight. No raised voices, no slammed doors. He stood in our kitchen, leaning against the counter like he was waiting for coffee to finish brewing, and said it in a calm, almost relieved tone, like this was something he'd already practiced in his head 100 times. "I think it's better if we separate." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him, not because the words were unclear, but because they didn't match the way he said them. There was no hesitation, no guilt, just certainty. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion, a slow, sinking kind of confusion that starts in your chest and spreads everywhere else. I remember looking at his face, trying to find any sign that this was hard for him too. Something, anything. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. He kept talking about space, about timing, about how things change. All those safe, emotionless phrases people use when they've already emotionally left and don't want to feel like the bad guy. What hurt the most wasn't that he was leaving. It was how peaceful he looked while doing it, like he'd finally made a decision that lifted a weight off his shoulders, like walking away from me was some kind of relief. And in that moment, standing there in my own kitchen, I realized something terrifying. He had already moved on. I was just the last thing he needed to tell. A few months earlier, our life didn't look broken at all. It wasn't perfect, but it was steady, predictable in a way that felt safe. We woke up at the same time every morning, complained about the same traffic, argued lightly over what to watch at night. The kind of marriage no one writes stories about, because nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. We had inside jokes that no one else understood, shared calendars on the fridge, weekend routines that never changed unless one of us was sick or tired. When people asked how we were doing, we both answered, "Good," without thinking. I thought that meant something. We'd been married 8 years, long enough to believe that the quiet parts of a relationship were proof it was real, that love didn't need constant excitement to survive, that choosing each other every day, even in the boring moments, was the point. I trusted him completely, not in a naive way, but in the way you trust someone who knows your habits, your weaknesses, the version of you that exists when no one else is watching. If there were cracks, I didn't see them then, or maybe I didn't want to. Because looking back now, I realize how easy it is to believe everything is fine right before it isn't. The layoff came on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that doesn't feel important until it changes everything. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my screen while my manager spoke in that careful, rehearsed voice people use when they don't want to take responsibility for what they're about to say. Restructuring, budget cuts, not performance-related. All the words that sound gentle but still land hard. By the time I drove home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Not because I didn't believe I'd find another job, but because I knew what it meant to suddenly lose momentum, to become, even temporarily, the one who needed support. When I told my husband that night, he hugged me, told me we'd be fine, said this was just a bump. But something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It was subtle enough that I questioned whether I was imagining it. The way his encouragement started sounding like reassurance meant more for himself than for me. The way his questions changed from, "How are you feeling?" to, "What's your plan?" I felt embarrassed for feeling insecure. I had always worked, always contributed. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. And yet, slowly, quietly, I could feel myself slipping into a different role in his eyes. Not a partner anymore. A problem that needed fixing. After that, the changes didn't come all at once. They showed up in pieces, small enough to ignore if you wanted to. He started staying later at work, always with a reasonable explanation. A project deadline, a team dinner, a client who needed extra attention. His phone never left his side anymore, face down, always on silent. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it quickly and keep talking, like nothing had happened. Compliments disappeared. Not just the romantic ones, but the casual acknowledgments too. The "you handled that well," or "I'm proud of you." They were replaced with silence, or worse, polite indifference. I noticed how often he talked about ambition now, about people who were driven, who knew what they wanted. Sometimes he'd mention a coworker, always casually, always as part of a story that didn't seem important. I told myself I was overthinking, that stress changes people, that this was temporary. But late at night, lying next to him while he scrolled on his phone with his back turned to me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lonely. Not alone. Lonely with someone who was already halfway gone. Her name started coming up more often after that. At first, it was nothing, just a passing mention. Someone he worked with, someone who had an opinion about a meeting or a project, the kind of thing spouses talk about without thinking. But then, I noticed how his tone changed when he said it. Lighter, more engaged, like the conversation finally interested him again. He'd repeat things she said, almost word for word, and laugh like it was clever. Sometimes he'd stop himself mid-sentence, glance at me, and then change the subject. That part hurt more than if he'd just kept talking. I didn't ask questions right away, not because I wasn't curious, but because I was afraid of what the answers might confirm. I didn't want to be the person who searched for problems just to prove I was right. So instead, I watched. I watched how he dressed differently for work, how he seemed more energized on weekdays than weekends, how my job search updates were met with encouragement that felt forced, like he was playing a role he no longer believed in. One night, he came home later than usual, smelling faintly like perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked how his day was, he answered too quickly, too rehearsed. That was the moment something settled in my chest. Not panic, not jealousy, recognition. I didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but I knew enough to understand this wasn't just distance anymore. This was replacement. I didn't confront him after that, not because I was scared, but because I needed to be sure I wasn't rewriting reality to protect my pride, so I stayed quiet. I noticed how his stories stopped lining up. Meetings that ended early, but somehow made him late. Messages he'd reply to instantly at work, but never around me. A new password on his phone, explained away with a shrug and something about company security. Then, one afternoon, completely by accident, everything clicked. He left his laptop open on the dining table while he showered. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just walking past when I saw my name in a message preview. It wasn't from him. It was from her. She'd written something casual, almost playful, about how I must be handling everything really well, followed by a smiley face that didn't belong in a professional conversation. My stomach dropped, not because of what the message said, but because of how familiar it sounded, like someone who already knew too much about my life. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. In that moment, all the loose pieces finally settled into place. The distance, the confidence he'd gained while I was losing mine, the way he talked about ambition, about people who fit his future. I closed the laptop gently and went back to the bedroom. When he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming like nothing in the world was wrong, I realized something that hurt more than the betrayal itself. He thought I was still in the dark, and somehow that made everything clearer. He told me a week later, not because I asked, not because he felt guilty, but because, in his mind, it was time to be honest. We were sitting on the couch, the TV on but muted, one of those evenings where you pretend to be together while living in completely separate worlds. He didn't ease into it. He didn't check if I was okay. He just said her name, said he hadn't planned for it to happen, said it started as support at work, said they connected because she understood his drive, his goals, his pressure. Then he paused, like he was choosing his words carefully, and said something I'll never forget. I don't think you and I are growing in the same direction anymore. I remember nodding slowly, like I was listening to feedback at a job I no longer wanted. Inside, something cracked, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of break that doesn't bleed right away, but changes the way you stand forever. He framed it like a mutual realization, like this was no one's fault, like my layoff was just an unfortunate coincidence in a much bigger story about compatibility. What he didn't say was that he'd already chosen her, that his decision had been made long before this conversation, long before my silence, long before my dignity. And when he finally said he wanted to leave, he waited for a reaction. Tears, anger, questions, anything that would confirm I was the one being left behind. But I didn't give him that. I sat there, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I said the only thing that felt honest in that moment. Okay. The word surprised him. I saw it in his face. He blinked like he'd misheard me, like I was supposed to fight harder for a life he'd already walked away from. He asked if I had anything else to say. I didn't, because somewhere in the quiet between us, I realized something important. He thought this was the end of my story, and I knew it was only the part where his stopped intersecting with mine. After he moved out, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow, like the walls were waiting for sounds that weren't coming back. The first few nights, I slept on my side of the bed without changing the sheets. I don't know why. Maybe part of me expected his weight to return to the other side, like this was all temporary, and someone would eventually admit a mistake. But mornings came anyway. I'd wake up, reach for my phone out of habit, then remember there was no one to text anymore. No drive safe, no did you eat. Just silence where a routine used to live. I didn't tell many people what happened, not because I was protecting him, but because I didn't have the energy to explain something that still didn't feel real. Everyone assumes betrayal comes with chaos. Mine came with paperwork. Division of accounts, canceling subscriptions, forwarding mail. The emotional weight hid behind tasks that made the loss feel administrative instead of personal. At night, though, when there was nothing left to organize, the pain showed up. Not as crying fits or dramatic breakdowns, but as a quiet, exhausting loop of questions. What did I miss? When did I stop being enough? How long had he been planning a future that didn't include me? I'd sit in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, realizing that the hardest part wasn't being alone. It was knowing he chose to leave, and did it without looking back. Eventually, something shifted. Not all at once, and not because I felt strong or inspired. It happened because staying frozen in that quiet pain became more exhausting than doing anything else. I started with structure, waking up at the same time every day, making my bed even when no one would see it. Updating my resume late at night when sleep wouldn't come. Small acts that didn't fix the hurt, but gave it edges, boundaries. I didn't announce anything to the world. I didn't post motivational quotes or new chapter captions. Most days, I barely spoke to anyone at all. What I was building felt too fragile to expose. I took courses I'd bookmarked years ago and never had time for. Reached out to old contacts I'd been meaning to catch up with. Applied for roles that scared me a little. Not because I felt ready, but because I was tired of shrinking. Some days I doubted everything. Other days I felt a quiet focus I hadn't felt in years, like my energy was finally being used for myself instead of maintaining a version of life that no longer existed. What surprised me most wasn't the progress, it was the calm. For the first time since he left, I wasn't reacting to what someone else had chosen. I was moving forward without needing permission, without needing to prove anything. He had no idea, and for once, I liked it that way. Time passed in a way that didn't feel dramatic enough to notice. There were no milestones worth announcing, no sudden moment where everything clicked into place. Just gradual change, stacking quietly on top of itself. Confidence returning without fanfare. Stability forming where uncertainty used to live. I heard about him occasionally through mutual acquaintances, how he'd moved in with her, how work was going well, how he seemed happy. Every update landed softer than the last, like my heart had learned how to absorb impact without breaking. What he didn't hear about was me. I stopped correcting people when they assumed I was still figuring things out. I let the narrative exist because it cost me nothing to maintain it. Meanwhile, I was stepping into rooms I'd never imagined myself in before, conversations that didn't require me to explain my worth. There was a strange freedom in being underestimated. No expectations to manage, no image to uphold. Just progress that belonged entirely to me. I knew more about his career trajectory than he realized, not because I was watching him, but because once our lives were deeply intertwined. I understood the pressure points of his industry, the decisions that could quietly make or break someone. At the time, it felt like useless knowledge. I didn't know yet how relevant it would become, but I could feel it. Something unfinished was slowly moving toward me. The invitation came through an email I almost ignored. It looked ordinary enough, a professional networking event tied to a project I'd recently been brought onto. Nothing flashy, just a date, a location, and a list of attendees I skimmed without much thought, until I saw his name. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my pulse steady but heavy. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't excited. It felt more like running into an old street on a map, somewhere I used to live but no longer belong to. I considered not going, not because I was afraid of seeing him, but because I didn't want to give the moment more importance than it deserved. In the end, I went anyway. Not for him, for myself. When I walked into the room that evening, nothing felt staged or dramatic. I didn't arrive early, and I didn't arrive late. I was simply there, comfortable, present, grounded in a way I hadn't been back then. I didn't see him at first. I was talking to someone about work, exchanging ideas, laughing easily, when I felt it, that familiar awareness of being looked at. I turned. He was standing across the room, frozen mid-conversation, his expression caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief, like he was trying to place a memory that no longer fit. Our eyes met, just for a second, and in that second, I saw it, the realization. Not just that I'd changed, but that I'd done it without him. He approached me slowly, like he wasn't sure whether I was real or just some version of me his mind had created. He said my name carefully, almost like a question. I smiled, polite and brief, the way you do with someone you recognize but no longer know. That seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever could. We exchanged a few surface-level words. Where are you now? How have you been? All the phrases people use when they're trying to catch up without admitting how much time has passed. He kept glancing around the room, then back at me, as if trying to understand why I was there. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't need to. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't just a social event for me. It was tied to a project that sat quietly at the center of my new role, one with influence he never imagined I'd have. As the evening moved on, our conversation was interrupted by someone asking for my input, then someone else, then another. Each time I excused myself with ease, stepping into discussions that mattered, decisions that carried weight. I could feel his attention following me, the confusion deepening as pieces of a story he thought he understood began to fall apart. At one point, he asked softly, "What exactly are you doing now?" I met his eyes, calm and unguarded, and answered honestly, but briefly, "I'm doing well." I didn't elaborate, because the silence did more work than any explanation ever could. Later that evening, the conversation shifted. A small group gathered near one of the tables, discussing next steps, budgets, timelines, the kind of talk that sounds casual on the surface, but decides real outcomes underneath. I joined without hesitation, listening more than I spoke at first. He hovered nearby, pretending to be absorbed in his phone, but I could feel his awareness tightening. This was his world, or at least it used to be. When someone asked for my opinion, I gave it calmly, not assertive, not apologetic, just clear. The room adjusted in a subtle way, like it accepted my voice as part of the structure without question. I saw it then, the shift in him. He wasn't just surprised to see me thriving. He was realizing that my presence here wasn't symbolic. It was practical. There was a moment when a decision came up, one that directly touched his department. Not a dramatic, career-ending choice, just the kind of thing that determines who gets opportunities and who gets overlooked. I didn't push. I didn't block. I didn't seek revenge. I simply spoke from experience, from perspective, from someone who understood the bigger picture. The outcome changed, not because of emotion, because of reason. And as the group dispersed, I caught his expression in the reflection of the glass wall, something between respect and regret, settling too late. He finally understood. I hadn't stayed silent because I had nothing to say. I stayed silent because I was growing beyond the need to be heard by him. As the night came to an end, people began saying their goodbyes, collecting coats, exchanging promises to follow up. The room slowly emptied, the energy winding down the way it always does after something important has already happened. He waited until we were almost alone. There was a hesitation in his posture I'd never seen before. Gone was the confidence he used to carry so effortlessly. In its place was uncertainty, careful and restrained. He said my name again, this time without the question in it. Then he paused, like he was searching for the right version of me to talk to. "I didn't know," he finally said, "about all of this." I nodded once, not because he needed reassurance, but because I understood what he was really saying. He didn't know because he hadn't asked. He didn't know because he'd already decided who I was when he left. He started to say something else, an apology, maybe, or an explanation. I'll never know because I didn't wait for it. I wished him well, not sarcastically, not dramatically, just sincerely. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the air was cool and steady. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a chapter fully closed. What I learned from all of it was simple, but it took years to understand. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming someone they no longer get access to. In the days that followed, I didn't replay the moment the way I thought I might. There was no urge to dissect his expression or imagine what he told her when he went home. That part of my life no longer felt like unfinished business. It felt archived. What stayed with me instead was how light everything felt afterward. How easily I moved through my routines. How natural it felt to take up space without shrinking or explaining myself. I realized then that the real shift hadn't happened at that event. It happened the moment I stopped measuring my worth by who chose me and started measuring it by who I became when no one was watching. He left thinking I was falling behind. The truth was, I was finally walking forward, just quietly enough that he never noticed until it was too late. There's a strange peace that comes after everything settles. Not happiness in the loud sense, not celebration, just clarity. I don't tell this story because I won something over him, or because my life turned out better in a way that can be measured or compared. I tell it because for a long time, I thought being left meant I wasn't enough. I thought silence meant defeat. I thought walking away without a fight meant losing. But now I understand something I couldn't see back then. Some people leave because they think they've reached your limit. They don't realize they're standing at the edge of it. I didn't chase. I didn't beg. I didn't explain myself to someone who had already decided not to listen. I just kept going. And sometimes, the most satisfying ending isn't watching someone regret losing you. It's realizing you stopped needing them to notice at all. Even now, when I think back to that version of myself, the one standing in the kitchen, stunned by how calmly her life was being undone, I don't feel anger. I feel compassion. She didn't know yet that endings don't always come with explosions. Sometimes they arrive quietly, disguised as relief on someone else's face. Sometimes the pain isn't in what's said, but in how easily it's said.
If I could tell her anything, it would be this. What feels like abandonment is sometimes just redirection. Not toward a better relationship, not toward success that proves a point, but toward a life where your value isn't negotiated, questioned, or compared. I didn't win because he noticed my growth. I won because I kept growing even when he didn't. And that's the kind of ending no one can take from you. That's where the story really ends. Not with him realizing what he lost, and not with me standing taller because of it. Those moments mattered, but they weren't the point.
The point was that the quiet version of me he walked away from didn't disappear. She evolved, and she did it without needing an audience, an explanation, or permission from someone who chose to leave before the growth began. Some endings look like loss at first, until you realize they were the only way forward. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this. The people who leave quietly often expect you to fall apart loudly. They expect your life to pause where they exited it. They expect to remain the most important chapter in your story. But life doesn't work that way. It keeps moving. It keeps shaping you. And sometimes it does its best work in the silence they never bothered to listen to. By the time they look back, you're already somewhere else. Not ahead of them, not behind them, just beyond their reach.